Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The 9,853rd meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation concerning the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Angola, Burundi, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Guatemala, Rwanda, Senegal, South Africa, Uruguay, and Zimbabwe to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. On behalf of the Council, I welcome Her Excellency Ms. Therese Kayikwamba Wagner, State Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation and Francophonie of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite Ms. Viviane van de Peer, Deputy Special Representative for Protection and Operations of the United Nations Stabilization Mission in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Ms. Viviane van de Peer.
Yeah, it's on and the mic is on. Can you hear them?
Yes.
You have the floor, madam.
We're having some difficulties here, but I hope you can hear me. Good afternoon, Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council.
Hi, Monusco, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
I can hear you, yes. It's a little low, but I can hear you. Can we zoom in the camera?
Zoom in the camera.
Zoom in the camera.
Zoom in. Leta kompyuta yote mbele. Leta kompyuta yote mbele. Yeah. Tena.
More. I cannot hear the sound.
Sound.
No sound.
Sound there.
Yeah, leave the camera there. Yeah, okay. Okay, he's moving right now.
That's okay.
Yes, the acting force commander and the yes. She cannot hear.
I cannot hear them. The president is talking to me.
Okay, you're welcome. Anasema na mwenye chini mwenye kwa kamera atoke. Amesema mwenye anaonekana kwa kamera atoke. So adjust hizi tutoke sisi wote. Hata na kamera ikae tu venye ilikuwa. Amesema kamera iko sawa.
Cannot hear the president. Speak.
Hi, Monusco, they're waiting for you to speak.
Where's the mouse? Mouse go. The mouse here.
Thank you, President. We apologize deeply for these technical difficulties. Can you hear me?
You have the floor, Madam.
Thank you. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, Madam Minister of State, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Permanent Representative of the Republic of Rwanda, and other distinguished ambassadors and representatives. Thank you for convening an emergency meeting of the Security Council to follow up on the situation in Goma. Allow me to share with you our understanding of the current situation and the implications for MONUSCO. The escalating clashes in eastern DRC have resulted in massive displacement. More than 178,000 people fled Kalehe territory when the M23 took over Minova, with more than 34,000 of them seeking refuge in already overcrowded existing IDP sites in and around Goma. This surge has exacerbated an already dire humanitarian situation and also a protection situation, overwhelming Goma's infrastructure and compounding challenges related to water, electricity, and medical services. Despite the deliberations and the appeal by member states at the Emergency Security Council meeting on 26 January, the M23 RDF launched an attack on Goma using heavy direct and indirect fire within hours after the conclusion of the Security Council meeting. These attacks continue to ravage the city, killing, injuring, traumatizing, and displacing civilians and exacerbating the crisis. In accordance with its obligations under international humanitarian law, during the last few days, MONUSCO has received a large number of people seeking refuge, including officials and various elements who have surrendered their arms, which underscores once again the critical role of peacekeeping in such a volatile environment. The mission's human rights component also continues to receive requests for individual protection measures from human rights defenders and civil society organizations, and is working internally and with external partners to ensure their safety. However, MONUSCO's bases are not able to accommodate the large number of surrendering elements and civilians seeking refuge. Moreover, our bases are not safe themselves. 2 mortars fell in MONUSCO bases and compounds in the last 3 days, as well as countless bullets. Installations of former police unit staff in Jambar camp have been destroyed and burned. MONUSCO is storing voluntarily relinquished or abandoned weapons in accordance with international standards. MONUSCO is taking concrete steps to secure these weapons, surrendered by various fighting elements, to avoid any possible scenario where the mission could be put under pressure to hand over those weapons to any group. Casualty evacuation efforts remain a significant challenge. During the fighting in Sake, which began 4 days ago, peacekeepers were seriously injured. We continue to do our utmost to ensure timely evacuation of injured peacekeepers and other casualties to a level 3 hospital in Goma, despite continuing challenges. The fighting of the past week has also severely hampered supply convoys and consumed many resources held by MONUSCO's units. Damage to camps, including water tanks, generators, and vehicles, has further exacerbated the situation. Many troops are now running out of critical equipment, especially water, food, medical supplies, and blood. In some camps, fuel shortages have rendered generators inoperable, affecting communications equipment. In addition, a significant number of non-combatants have sought refuge in MONUSCO's camps in need of food, water, and medical care, further straining already limited supplies. The MONUSCO warehouse at the airport has been looted, further depleting supplies. The courthouse in Goma has been looted, and I can continue with this list. The proliferation of weapons in Goma poses a significant risk as combatants blend into the civilian population and abandoned military depots are looted by civilians. The mass influx of internally displaced persons without shelter, the separation of families, the proliferation of armed elements, and the escape of prisoners following a breakout from Goma prison increase the vulnerability of women and children to sexual and gender-based violence. Therefore, in line with the appeal of the Bishop of Goma, we call on all parties and the population to guarantee the protection of life and access to basic services for all and to prevent sexual violence. Armed clashes in Masisi, Rutshuru, and Nyiragongo continue to result in civilian casualties and displacements, further escalating the humanitarian crisis. Electricity and water supplies remain disrupted in Goma, and medical facilities are completely overwhelmed. Due to the intensity of the ongoing combat and the proximity of the front lines, humanitarian operations have been suspended or readjusted. Immediate action is required to alleviate the suffering of civilians and enable life-saving humanitarian efforts to proceed. Moreover, ethnically motivated attacks in a region with a very sensitive history need to be taken seriously. In the past 4 days, the Human Rights Office has documented at least one case of ethnically motivated lynching in an IDP site in Goma, as well as physical and verbal violence against journalists in Goma, all due to their perceived ethnic identity. In light of the ongoing crisis, we urgently require the end of jamming and spoofing, as well as the establishment of humanitarian corridors between Goma, Minova, and Bukavu. This will allow the resupply of essential items, the rotation of humanitarian staff, and the safe movement of civilians. We also appeal for the establishment of high-level diplomatic channels to ensure that critical airports, border points, and humanitarian access routes are reopened without delay. We stress that military action cannot resolve this conflict. It is imperative that all parties cease hostilities and commit to political dialogue in order to prevent further civilian suffering. Resuming the Luanda process is of the utmost urgency to ensure a path towards de-escalation and to avert the looming threat of a third Congo war. We remind all parties of their obligation to uphold international humanitarian law and stress that attacks on United Nations peacekeepers may constitute war crimes. The degree of suffering that the population in Goma and its environments is enduring is truly unimaginable. Let us please draw on our humanity and do our utmost to bring an immediate end to such levels of violence and suffering. In conclusion, the situation in Goma requires urgent and coordinated international action. Despite the significant challenges, MONUSCO continues to play a vital role in this crisis in the Eastern DRC and has proven to be a beacon for myriad vulnerable groups seeking protection. However, the mission is challenged in ensuring the safety of its staff and premises, which has been severely impacted by the heavy direct and indirect fire used in these last few days, and to address the logistical, human rights, and humanitarian challenges we are all facing to ensure the mission's continued effectiveness. We call on all parties to prioritize the protection of civilians, open humanitarian corridors, and work towards a sustainable and peaceful resolution of the conflict. I thank you very much.
I thank Ms. Viviane van de Peer for the statement. I now give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements. And I give the floor to the representative of France.
Monsieur le Président, je remercie la représentante spéciale adjointe du secrétaire général pour sa présentation et je salue la présence parmi nous de la ministre des Affaires étrangères de la République démocratique du Congo. Le Conseil de sécurité se réunit une nouvelle fois en raison de la détérioration continue de la situation dans le Nord Kivu. À l'heure où nous parlons, le M23 prend le contrôle de Goma avec le soutien actif du Rwanda. Cela doit constituer un signal d'alerte pour ce Conseil, comme cela avait été le cas il y a 12 ans. Le risque de contagion régionale est réel. La prise de Goma comporte des risques majeurs pour la sécurité des populations et elle conduit au déplacement de centaines de milliers de personnes. Il est impératif d'y mettre un terme. La France condamne fermement cette offensive. Le M23 doit cesser immédiatement son offensive et se retirer des territoires dont il a pris le contrôle. Le soutien aux groupes armés par toutes les parties doit cesser. La priorité va donc au retour au cessez-le-feu et à la reprise du dialogue. Il n'y a pas d'issue militaire au conflit. La France réaffirme sa solidarité envers la République démocratique du Congo et son attachement indéfectible à son intégrité territoriale et à sa souveraineté. Ici comme ailleurs, le respect de la Charte des Nations Unies s'impose. La France poursuit ses contacts au plus haut niveau afin de relancer un processus politique. Nous saluons la mobilisation régionale et nous espérons que la réunion du Conseil de paix et sécurité de l'Union africaine ce jour et le sommet de la Communauté d'Afrique de l'Est demain permettront d'avancer dans la direction d'une paix durable. Le dialogue engagé dans le cadre des processus de Luanda et Nairobi doit reprendre sans délai. La France apporte son plein soutien à ces processus et elle appelle les parties à respecter leurs engagements conclus dans le cadre du processus de Luanda. Retrait des troupes rwandaises du territoire congolais et mise en œuvre du plan de démantèlement des forces démocratiques de libération du Rwanda. Enfin, la France tient à réaffirmer avec force son soutien à la MONUSCO. Son mandat a été renouvelé à l'unanimité le 20 décembre dernier. Nous condamnons les attaques menées par le M23 à son encontre qui ont conduit à la mort de plusieurs casques bleus ces derniers jours. Nous exprimons nos condoléances à leurs familles. Les personnels et les emprises des Nations Unies doivent être respectés. Les attaques contre les casques bleus, ainsi que des civils et des personnels humanitaires, sont susceptibles de constituer des crimes de guerre. Un accès humanitaire complet doit être garanti et les violations du droit international humanitaire et des droits de l'homme doivent être condamnées. La France condamne à nouveau le déploiement de systèmes de missiles solaires et de brouillage des signaux GPS dans les zones contrôlées par le M23, avec le soutien direct des forces rwandaises de défense. La MONUSCO doit pouvoir continuer à mener son action pour protéger les populations. La situation à Goma emporte des conséquences humanitaires et politiques majeures. Nous nous assurerons que ce Conseil reste pleinement mobilisé face à la gravité de cette situation. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of France for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, thank you for convening this emergency meeting of the Security Council. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the A3+ members, Algeria, Guyana, Somalia, and my own country, Sierra Leone. At the outset, we pay tribute to the brave peacekeepers, MONUSCO personnel, and other UN staff who are risking their lives in pursuit of peace and the protection of civilians in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. We also honor those peacekeepers and Sami DRC personnel who have made the ultimate sacrifice in service of peace. Our deepest condolences go to their families and to the government and people of South Africa, Malawi, and Uruguay. We express our gratitude to Ms. Viviane van der Peer, Deputy Special Representative for Protection and Operations in MONUSCO, for a comprehensive briefing on the dire situation on the ground. We also welcome the participation of Her Excellency Therese Kaikwamba Wagner, State Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of the DRC, as well as the representatives of all other participating states in this meeting. Mr. President, we commend the swift convening of this emergency meeting. In less than 72 hours, the Security Council has convened for a second time to address the rapidly evolving situation in Eastern DRC. The A3+ is deeply concerned about the volatility of the situation, the ongoing conflict, and the resulting stalemate, which present a high risk of a broader regional conflict. We have listened attentively to Ms. van der Per's briefing, and it is clear that the people of Goma, and indeed the wider Congolese population, deserve more than a temporary cessation of the M23/AFC offensive. They need the guns to be silent through a comprehensive political process that will not only end their suffering, but also guarantee respect for the DRC's sovereignty and territorial integrity. In this regard, we make the following point. First, we call for an immediate de-escalation of the tension and a restoration of calm in Goma. We urge the M23-AFC to cease its advances and for all parties to exercise the utmost restraint to ensure the protection of civilians. Given the unpredictable and volatile nature of the situation in Goma and surrounding areas, it is imperative that all efforts, whether from MONUSCO or other actors, focus on safeguarding the population from harm. Given Goma's critical role in facilitating access to the region, all efforts to protect civilians must also address the need for humanitarian access, as well as the safety and security of UN peacekeepers and SAMI DRC personnel. The M23/AFC must refrain from obstructing humanitarian assistance or closing humanitarian corridors. The A3+ stresses the critical need for uninterrupted aid to reach the most vulnerable and reminds all parties of their obligations under international humanitarian law to protect civilian lives and ensure the delivery of aid to those in need. Second, as we have stated before, the situation in Eastern DRC will not be resolved through military means. It requires a political solution, supported by diplomacy and regional cooperation. Since our last meeting on Sunday, we have seen significant African diplomatic efforts to support the Congolese people and encourage both the DRC and Rwanda to reach a mutually acceptable resolution. We recognize the leadership of President William Ruto of Kenya, who has called for an East African Community meeting that will take place in the coming hours. Earlier today, the African Union Peace and Security Council convened an emergency ministerial meeting in Addis Ababa. These regional efforts are commendable, but what is needed now is the commitment of both Rwanda and the DRC to engage in direct negotiations under the Luanda process in good faith with the support of all these initiatives to bring a prompt resolution to the situation in Goma. We strongly call on both Rwanda and DRC to fully engage under the Luanda process, which is being led by the African Union's designated mediator, His Excellency João Lourenço, President of Angola, to resolve the outstanding issues between them. We are aware that the longer this deadlock persists, the greater the risk of further escalation, which will become increasingly difficult to contain. If the political leadership of Rwanda and the DRC can engage in direct talks, there is hope for delivering much-needed relief to the Congolese people. Third, to achieve a lasting solution that fully respects the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC, while also addressing Rwanda's security concerns, it is critical for both countries to fully implement their commitment under the Luanda process. The A3+ remain convinced that the Luanda process offers the best pathway to peace in the DRC. Through this process, a ceasefire agreement was reached, though regrettably breached, along with an agreement on a harmonized plan, reinforced ad hoc verification mechanism, and a comprehensive concept of operations. The A3+ calls on all parties to honor their commitment under the Luanda process. Given the unfortunate development on the ground, and in pursuit of peace and stability in the DRC and the wider region. The A3+ urges the government of Rwanda to withdraw its troops from DRC territories without preconditions and without delay, and to cease its reported support to the M23 AFC. Similarly, we urge the government of the DRC to sever its ties with FDLR and to implement its commitment to neutralize this group. We also regret that President Lourenço of Angola had no choice but to evacuate members of the reinforced ad hoc verification mechanism due to the untenable security situation in Eastern DRC. While the ceasefire agreement has been violated, the mechanism remains incomplete and has not been fully operationalized. Fourth, the natural wealth of the DRC must translate into prosperity for its people. All actors, both local and external, who continue to illegally exploit the country's resources and fuel the conflict must be held accountable. Mr. President, the A3+ expresses deep concern and regret over the reported attacks on embassies in Kinshasa amidst protests relating to the M23 AFC rebel group's offensive in Eastern DRC. These acts against diplomatic missions and their personnel violate international law. As we acknowledge the legitimate concerns of the Congolese people regarding the security situation in Eastern DRC and the activities of the M23 rebel group, we call for the protection of diplomatic missions and strongly urge all parties to refrain from violence, respect diplomatic norms, and exercise restraint. Peaceful and constructive engagement remains the most effective way to address these pressing issues. In closing, we are all well aware of the critical importance of Goma to the Congolese people. Goma is the heart of the DRC. Allowing this vital city to remain under the control of a rebel group sends a disturbing message about the ability or willingness of the international community to prevent threats to international peace and security from flourishing. It is a moral imperative for all actors, including this Council, to act decisively to address the unfolding situation in Goma and to tackle the structural root causes of this conflict. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. Let me start by thanking DSOSG Van der Peer for briefing us today. And I welcome the participation of DRC Foreign Minister Wagner, alongside other representatives from the region and troop-contributing countries. President, the UK is deeply alarmed by the events that have unfolded in Eastern DRC. Since we met on Sunday, M23, with support from the Rwandan Defence Forces, have closed in on Goma. M23 have declared that it is now under their control. The humanitarian impacts are dire. The advances have displaced close to 1 million people in North and South Kivu. Civilian casualties are rising. Hundreds of thousands of people who have already fled from M23's advances, many of them several times before, are now on the move again, with virtually nowhere safe to go. How many times must they pack up their lives and flee? The cycle must end. The UK is also deeply concerned by the limited ability of humanitarian actors to get help to those who need it. Key humanitarian routes, land, water and air, are closed, and hospitals are overcrowded, with staff risking their own lives to provide emergency assistance. More than 800,000 people in the area who were prioritised for support may no longer receive vital food and nutritional assistance. We call on the parties not to obstruct the vital services that humanitarians are providing, and to cease hostilities and uphold the protection of humanitarian workers, as required in international humanitarian law. We also urge all parties to consider essential humanitarian corridors to allow the resupply and delivery of essential life-saving items and the freedom and safe movement of civilians and humanitarian actors. President, the UK is also deeply concerned by the continued endangering of peacekeepers' lives. On Sunday, I expressed my condolences to the families of the 13 who'd already been killed. Since then, 4 more peacekeepers have tragically been killed. We urge an immediate end to this violence. We commend the leadership of MONUSCO, your courage under fire, and we thank you for the vital work of the mission. Finally, President, the UK's Foreign Secretary and Minister for Africa have spoken with Rwanda at the highest levels, as well as with wider partners in the region, and we have made clear that there can be no military solution. We urge all parties to cease hostilities and return to diplomatic talks immediately without preconditions. We remain committed to ensuring this Council takes the necessary action to support an end to this conflict. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Господин председатель, благодарим заместителя спецпредставителя генерального секретаря Вивьен Ван де Пер за брифинг. Приветствуем участие в заседании министра иностранных дел Демократической Республики Конго Терезы Вагнер, представителей остальных стран, запросившихся по правилу 37. Уважаемые коллеги, 2 дня назад мы встречались в этом зале и обсуждали тревожное развитие ситуации на востоке этой страны. В последние 48 часов она стремительно деградировала, особенно в связи с захватом Гомы, где находится свыше 1 миллиона гражданских лиц. Россия решительно осуждает действия группировки М-23. Мы призываем к немедленной остановке боестолкновений и выводу бойцов этого незаконного вооруженного формирования из захваченных населенных пунктов и занятых территорий. Мы также призываем внешние силы прекратить поддержку М-23 и отозвать свои воинские подразделения. Необходимо без промедления возобновить переговорный процесс в Луанде. Нельзя допускать разрастания и эскалации, создающие угрозу жизням людей по обе стороны границы и чреватой скатыванием к межгосударственному конфликту регионального масштаба. Мы глубоко озабочены гуманитарными последствиями происходящего. На наших с вами глазах и без того тяжелая ситуация в Северном Киву превращается в настоящую гуманитарную катастрофу. Гома фактически отрезана от внешнего мира, что может привести к тяжелейшим последствиям для жителей города и бежавших туда внутренне перемещенных лиц. Вновь выражаем соболезнования семьям погибших граждан ДРК, миротворцев ООН и павших бойцов сообщества развития Юга Африки. Мы солидарны с правительствами ДРК и государств, потерявших своих военнослужащих. Желаем скорейшего выздоровления всем раненым. Хотел бы подчеркнуть, что Россия безоговорочно осуждает нападение на миротворцев. Это абсолютно неприемлемо. Мы твердо поддерживаем миссию ООН по стабилизации в Демократической Республике Конго, ее руководство и голубые каски. Мы также осуждаем любые нападения или проявления агрессии в отношении иностранных дипломатических представительств. Такие действия не имеют ничего общего с мирными демонстрациями. Призываем Киншасу обеспечить защиту зарубежных миссий и дипломатического персонала в соответствии с Венской конвенцией и международными обязательствами. Насилие на востоке ДРК необходимо остановить. Однако военного пути урегулирования кризиса не существует. Совершенно очевидно, что это возможно только в результате политической договоренности. Убеждены, что луандийский процесс остается той площадкой, где эта договоренность может быть достигнута. Мы внимательно выслушали представителя Анголы в ходе заседания этого совета в прошедшее воскресенье. Он прямо сказал, что единственным препятствием для подписания документа о примирении между Киншасой и Кигали остался вопрос о прекращении государственного взаимодействия с незаконными вооруженными формированиями. Прежде всего, это касается М-23. Без урегулирования статуса этой группировки в рамках межконголезского диалога попытки добиться оздоровления отношений между ДРК и Руандой не принесут устойчивого результата. В этом смысле крайне востребованы срочный перезапуск найробийского процесса или продвижение схожих региональных инициатив. Альтернативы этому нет. Господин председатель, попытки урегулировать кризис также будут бесплодными, если страны региона Великих озер не примут решительных мер для борьбы с незаконной эксплуатацией контрабандной природных ресурсов. Их львиная доля, как известно, поступает именно с охваченного нестабильностью востока ДРК. Пересмотреть свое отношение к потреблению этих ресурсов должны также внерегиональные игроки и крупные международные ТНК, в чьих интересах не прекращается поток незаконных поставок кровавых минералов. Эти же государства имеют все инструменты, чтобы остановить горячую фазу конфликта и оказать давление на стороны для того, чтобы они вернулись к переговорам. Они должны быть задействованы для сохранения человеческих жизней и прекращения страданий сотен тысяч гражданских лиц. К сожалению, все мы видели, что принятое Советом заявление не остановило М-23 и тех, кто поддерживает эту группировку, от захвата Гомы и продолжения боевых действий. Россия со своей стороны будет использовать все возможности, в том числе на площадке этого Совета, чтобы остановить эскалацию и восстановить перспективу дипломатического регулирования в интересах стабилизации ситуации на востоке ДРК. Благодарю вас.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, President. Thank you, DSRSG, Vivian van de Peer, for your briefing on the unacceptable events of the last 48 hours. The United States condemns the seizure of Goma and urges this Council to consider measures to halt the territorial advances by Rwandan troops and M23. We stand in firm support of the Congolese people and of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC, and urge Rwanda to respect the same. At the same time, we are watching with concern and deplore the destruction of diplomatic facilities in Kinshasa and call on the DRC government to respect its obligations to protect diplomatic premises and personnel. We call for an immediate ceasefire and end to this fighting. Rwanda must withdraw troops from the DRC. Rwanda and the DRC must return to the negotiating table and work toward a sustainable, peaceful solution. We remain deeply concerned about the human rights abuses, displacement, and other impacts on Congolese civilians suffering the brunt of this fighting. Civilians, including the growing number of IDPs and refugees in Sake, Goma, and beyond, must be protected. More than ever, humanitarian actors must be allowed to operate freely and deliver life-saving aid. The rights of all Goma's inhabitants, including former combatants, must be respected. We are similarly concerned that M23's and Rwanda's ongoing advances are opening up a bloody new front to this conflict in South Kivu, which no longer benefits from the roles MONUSCO assumed in the past to protect civilians and facilitate humanitarian assistance. We must not allow this violence to spiral into a wider regional conflict, which would incur a horrific human toll. We mourn all the Congolese who have lost their lives in this fighting. We also extend heartfelt condolences to the countries and families of UN peacekeepers and SAMI DRC troops lost during these attacks. We applaud MONUSCO for its commitment to protect civilians and the bravery and professionalism demonstrated by peacekeepers in recent weeks. As we have said before, Rwanda's support to M23 remains wholly at odds with its robust support to UN peacekeeping. Rwanda said on Sunday that it means no harm to MONUSCO. but 3 peacekeepers have been killed, with many more injured. Additionally, UN and humanitarian personnel, as well as civilians, are endangered by Rwanda's ongoing use of GPS interference and deployment of advanced weapons and systems. Hope is not lost. There is an end in sight to this fighting and a path for a regional dialogue, but the international community must act now. Those unwilling to return to the negotiating table must face a clear and unambiguous response from the Council. We must abandon the delusion of short-term military solutions and work instead toward a durable peace powered by regional economic arrangements for the Great Lakes' vast mineral wealth to ensure stability and prosperity for local populations. Addressing historical grievances, ending ethnic attacks, and other roots of this conflict must be done through a process that has clear incentives and unmistakable accountability. The international community has the tools in hand to end the fighting and build sustainable solutions to the Eastern DRC conflict. We must collectively marshal the will to leverage such tools, as the United States is fully prepared to do, or be prepared to accept unthinkable cost, measured in human lives. Indeed, as the United States observed at our briefing on Sunday, we will consider all the tools at our disposal in order to hold accountable those responsible for sustaining armed conflict, instability, and insecurity in the DRC. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, dear SRG Van der Peer, for your briefing on this serious and evolving situation. I welcome this presence of Her Excellency Foreign Minister Wagner at this meeting. Mr. President, just 2 days ago, this Council convened urgently to address the situation in Eastern DRC. We were briefed on the dramatic escalation of Goma on a knife's edge, of peacekeepers being killed and civilians fleeing. Today, the situation has continued to deteriorate. Let me be clear. Denmark strongly condemns the ongoing offensive by M23 with support of the Rwanda Defense Forces and the military presence of Rwanda in DRC. We demand that M23, supported by the RDF, immediately halt and reverse their territorial expansion and withdraw. We demand that Rwanda ceases its support to the M23 and that the DRC ceases its support to the FDLR. Colleagues, we've all seen the devastating images. Shelling and heavy artillery in the city center of Goma, civilians fleeing, overcrowded hospitals, and ongoing looting. Denmark is extremely concerned about the risk of urban conflict, as well as sexual violence following the influx of armed elements and the Goma prison escape. Likewise, we are deeply alarmed by the risk of attacks against human rights defenders who now fear individual persecution and ethnically motivated attacks. We also express our deep concern with the recent attacks on diplomatic missions in Kinshasa. This is unacceptable. Mr. President, against this dangerous and rapidly developing backdrop, allow me to highlight 4 key points. First, Denmark demands an immediate cessation of hostilities, as well as unhindered, rapid and safe humanitarian access to all populations in and around Goma. This includes open humanitarian corridors, open land borders, and airspace. This cannot be understated. In line with international humanitarian law, medical and humanitarian personnel must be protected, and their ability to provide life-saving care must be ensured. Parties must engage with the UN humanitarian actors for deconfliction purposes and allow trauma and specialized medical teams urgent access. Upholding IHL is not an option, it's an obligation. Second, Denmark firmly condemns any form of violence targeting civilians and objects indispensable to the survival of the civilian populations. We demand their immediate protection and the respect for human rights, regardless of ethnic group, gender, or age. Perpetrators of any attack against civilians must be held to account, no matter their rank or affiliation. Third, we express our full support to MONUSCO as it fulfills its critical mandate facing extremely difficult circumstances. We remind the parties that any involvement in attacks against MONUSCO peacekeepers may constitute a war crime and a basis for sanctions designations pursuant to United Nations Security Council resolutions. Fourth, Mr. President, as we underlined just 2 days ago, there is no military solution to this conflict, only a political one. We urge DRC and Rwanda to immediately and in good faith fully re-engage and fully recommit to diplomatic talks in the regional peace processes in place. The Luanda and Nairobi processes are the means to solve this conflict. Colleagues, we are not here merely to request that the parties uphold their obligations under international law. When these obligations are consistently violated, it is incumbent upon us to consider all appropriate tools at the Council's disposal. Mr. President, to conclude, the people of the DRC deserve peace. The peoples of the Great Lake region deserve peace. As the UN body charged with the maintenance of international peace and security, this Council should act decisively in support of this goal. Count on Denmark's support. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank Algeria for convening this urgent meeting. We also thank Ms. van der Peer for her briefing. Mr. President, just 2 days ago, this Council condemned the advances of M23 and demanded that the offensive and advances towards Goma immediately stop. Unfortunately, the developments since then have only confirmed our fears. Mr. President, the M23's continued offensive, including the seizure of Goma, with support from Rwanda Defense Forces, is a clear threat to regional stability. We strongly condemn these actions. Slovenia renews its demand for the immediate ceasefire and the unconditional withdrawal of M23 from the occupied territories. The risk of this conflict escalating into a wider regional crisis must not be underestimated, and recent developments have only amplified these fears. Our message is clear. The violence must stop, and diplomacy must take the lead. Slovenia continues to call on Rwanda to fully withdraw its forces from the DRC territory in accordance with international law and to cease its support to M23. We strongly condemn the ongoing violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC. They must be respected. We also continue to call on the DRC to cease all cooperation with the FDLR and other armed groups. We are gravely alarmed by the escalating risks in Goma and its surroundings, with the risks of urban fighting and the use of heavy weapons in densely populated areas. There is no time to waste. Mr. President, this is yet another nightmare chapter in this ongoing conflict, forcing hundreds of thousands of civilians to flee, too many of them not for the first time. They're living in fear, they're hungry, they're exposed to vulnerabilities which are further intensified by the presence and influx of armed elements. Restoring and returning to an agreed ceasefire is imperative, but immediate measures are also needed to protect civilians, humanitarian and medical facilities, critical infrastructure, including electricity, water, and communication networks. Safe humanitarian corridors must enable aid delivery and civilian evacuations. Heavy weapons and troops must be withdrawn from the IDP sites. We cannot stress this enough. International humanitarian aid and international humanitarian and human rights law must be upheld by all parties at all times. We call on both countries to exercise maximum restraint. We remain hopeful that strong African engagement through the African Union, the East African Community, and the Luanda processes can help turn the tide through dialogue, and we commend these efforts. Strengthened by this Council, continued engagement, and bilateral efforts, these actions highlight the value of complementing all paths to peace, and Slovenia fully supports them. We urge Rwanda and the DRC to heed calls for peace from the region and the wider international community, and especially those fleeing bullets and bombs, to de-escalate and re-engage in a diplomatic process. Mr. President, we strongly support MONUSCO and its vital mission to protect civilians and recall the need to ensure their safety and security. We unequivocally condemn all attacks and threats against MONUSCO personnel, humanitarian and medical workers who, even as we speak, continue to carry out their life-saving work under fire. In closing, Mr. President, let me express Slovenia's grave concern over the attacks on diplomatic missions in Kinshasa. Any such actions are entirely unacceptable and a clear violation of international law. We call for the protection of diplomatic missions in strict accordance with the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President, for convening this emergency meeting following Sundays. I thank Deputy SRSG Van de Per for her sobering briefing. I welcome Minister Wagner of the DRC. At the outset, the Republic of Korea reaffirms its steadfast support for MONUSCO and the regional and sub-regional organizations for their tireless efforts in addressing this perilous crisis. We also reiterate our firm commitment to ensuring the safety and security of MONUSCO peacekeepers. At the same time, we strongly condemn the attacks on diplomatic missions in Kinshasa and urgently call for their immediate cessation. We urge the DRC government to fulfill its obligations under international law by ensuring the protection of all diplomatic missions within its territory. Mr. President, I would like to underscore 3 points today as we confront the devastating and fluid developments on the ground. First, we deeply regret that the unified call of the Security Council during Sunday's meeting, and along with the subsequent press statement, has been blatantly disregarded by the M23 and Rwanda. We demand that the M23 immediately halts its unjustifiable military actions in eastern DRC and withdraw from its offensive in Goma. Their reckless actions are forcing civilians to flee with no safe refuge, endangering hundreds of thousands of innocent lives. Equally critical, we urge Rwanda to refrain from further escalating the conflict. We must once again stress our urgent appeal to Rwanda to cease all forms of support to M23 and promptly withdraw any unauthorized military presence from DRC territory. These actions undermine the foundational principles of the UN Charter, including respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity. Second, the Security Council must consider all measures at its disposal to bring an end to this devastating conflict. The Council must deliver a more decisive and unequivocal message. In addition, concrete actions must be pursued to effectively influence the strategic calculations of the parties involved in the conflict. We must recall that it was strong diplomatic pressure that stopped the M23 back in 2012. A thorough investigation into the attacks against peacekeepers is also vital. The safety and security of UN peacekeepers is a top priority for the Security Council. All perpetrators of violations of international humanitarian and international human rights laws, including sexual and gender-based violence, must also be held accountable. Third, both the DRC and Rwanda must return to meaningful negotiations and fully honor their obligations under the Rwanda process. We reaffirm our full support for President Lourenço of Angola in his critical mediation efforts. We also look forward to the African Union Peace and Security Council playing a key role in exerting necessary pressure, following its emergency ministerial meeting held this morning. Furthermore, we encourage sustained and coordinated pressure from all regional and international actors at the highest levels of government to help urgently de-escalate this conflict. In conclusion, Mr. President, the Security Council must take action. Most importantly, we must not lose sight of the innocent civilians who, even as we meet here today, are awaiting the Council's action. The Republic of Korea remains steadfast in its commitment to constructive engagement, working collectively to swiftly and decisively overturn the consequences of unlawful military actions. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
谢谢主席。首先，我感谢你召集此次紧急会议，感谢佩尔副特别代表所做的通报，欢迎刚果金外长卡伊宽巴女士出席会议。继周日安理会审议刚果东局势以来，地面局势急转直下 ，M23 运动攻入北基乌省首府格马，大批平民逃离家园，爆发更大规模冲突的风险在上升，形势发展令人深感担忧。中国重申坚定支持刚果军主权和领土完整，反对任何违反联合国宪章和国际法的行为。中方要求 M23 运动立即停止一切敌对行动，撤出格马等占领区。中方希望卢旺达重视古特雷斯秘书长以及有关非洲国家发出的呼吁，停止对 M23 运动的军事支持，从刚果金领土立即撤出所有军事力量。我们敦促冲突各方遵守国际人道法，保护平民和民用设施的安全。同时，在刚果金的外国公民和机构安全也应得到保护。中方再次强烈谴责 M23 运动针对联合国维和人员的袭击。我们向联刚团在极其危险环境下坚守岗位表示敬意，支持联刚团按照安理会授权继续开展保护平民等工作。我们重申，针对维和人员的任何袭击都不可接受，敦促各方避免采取可能危及维和营地和维和人员安全的行动。主席，需要强调的是，刚东问题没有军事解决的方案，外交谈判是唯一出路。中方支持安哥拉以及南非、肯尼亚等国的领导人同当事国进行紧急沟通，欢迎东共体宣布将举行紧急会议。我们呼吁卢旺达和刚果金尽快重回外交对话轨道，落实在卢安达进程下相互作出的承诺，包括消除 FDLR 武装的威胁。希望两国积极回应国际社会和地区国家的斡旋调解努力，坚持通过对话谈判解决存在的关切。当前，刚东局势正处在十分危险的重要节点，中方支持安理会保持团结，采取必要行动，为防止局势进一步恶化，推动政治解决创造有利条件。谢谢主席。
I thank the representative of China for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
I thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we thank you for convening this meeting on this urgent topic. We thank Deputy SRS Chief Vivian Vanderpeer for her valuable briefing. We also welcome the participation of the Foreign Minister of the DRC in this meeting, as well as the permanent representatives of Rwanda, Uruguay, Angola, Guatemala, Zimbabwe, and Burundi. Mr. President, since we met on Sunday, the M23 seems to be in control of Goma. Thousands of people are currently fleeing their homes,
adding to the millions already internally displaced in eastern DRC. Many UN and other peacekeeping troops are still encountering mortar and small arms fire. 3 UN peacekeepers have lost their lives and 22 have been injured. Sami DRC has also taken fatalities and casualties. We once again express our deepest condolences to the families of the fallen peacekeepers and pay tribute to their bravery, and especially those who died in the line of duty. I would like to make the following points. First, we strongly condemn M23's offensive on Goma. It must immediately stop its advance and vacate all territories it has occupied. We condemn the violations of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC. All foreign forces must be withdrawn from the territory of the DRC. Second, the M23 siege of Goma has grave humanitarian consequences. The UN Secretariat and other humanitarian actors, in consultations with the DRC, should urgently develop a plan for the protection of civilians, the handling of internally displaced people, and addressing the humanitarian crisis in eastern DRC. The M23 must not impede access for immediate, safe, and unhindered humanitarian aid and humanitarian personnel to the affected areas and to the affected people, including through humanitarian corridors. Third, we strongly condemn the continued attacks on the peacekeepers. Attacks on peacekeepers constitute war crimes, and those responsible for perpetrating, supporting, and sponsoring these attacks must be held accountable. At the same time, we deplore the attacks on diplomatic facilities in Kinshasa. We ask the UN Secretariat and MONUSCO, in consultations with the DRC, to urgently present an effective plan to ensure the safety and security of MONUSCO and other peacekeepers, including through the steps that they have already taken. Fourth, we stress that there is no military solution to the conflict in eastern DRC. We call on Rwanda and the DRC to cease hostilities and to immediately revive the Luanda process of dialogue under the mediatory leadership of President Lorenzo of Angola. The understandings reached under this process, that is the neutralization of the FDLR and the withdrawal of Rwandan forces from DRC, should be maintained and implemented even as the challenge posed by the M23 is confronted and resolved. We hope that the reconciliation within DRC will be achieved, especially through the Nairobi process. We also extend our full support to the Special Envoy for the Great Lakes region in promoting dialogue to resolve the conflict in eastern DRC. Fifth, we appreciate the communiqué issued today by the African Peace and Security Council on the situation in DRC, in eastern DRC. African institutions would no doubt have to play a very important role in bringing the decades-old conflict to an end in accordance with the call for African solutions to African problems and silencing the guns. Sixth, the Security Council and the Secretary General will need to evaluate the future role of MONUSCO in the evolving circumstances in eastern DRC. In our view, the mission must be maintained and its mandate reviewed and adapted to respond to the new circumstances and operating environment. The mission will need to be adequately reinforced and equipped to discharge its current or modified mandate. Finally, Mr. President, we once again call to address the issue of the illegal exploitation of the DRC's natural resources, which is the root cause of this conflict. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank Ms. van der Per, Deputy SRSG, for briefing us on this urgent meeting today, and commend the courage of all of MONUSCO's personnel in these very difficult circumstances. I would also like to welcome the participation of the Honorable Foreign Minister of the Democratic Republic of the Congo in our meeting. Mr. President, allow me to emphasize 4 key points. First, we strongly condemn the capture of the town of Sake on January 23rd and the invasion of Goma on January 27th by M23. We reiterate that the sovereignty, unity and territorial integrity of the DRC must be fully respected. The presence of Rwandan troops on the territory of DRC and the support to the M23, as also stated by the Secretary General on January 26, are very concerning and are strongly condemned. We call on Rwanda to cease its support to the M23 and to withdraw its forces now. Second, we call for urgent de-escalation, and we stress that it is more imperative than ever that particularly Rwanda and DRC commit to the ceasefire as agreed last August, re-engage the political dialogue, and implement all decisions and commitments agreed under the Luanda process. Greece will continue to support African-led initiatives and welcomes the emergency ministerial session on the conflict in Eastern DRC convened today by the African Union Peace and Security Council and the upcoming meeting of SADC tomorrow. We call DRC and Rwanda to return immediately to the table of negotiations. Third, we are deeply concerned about the grave humanitarian security consequences of the M23 offensive in North Kivu. All parties must respect international humanitarian law and ensure unrestricted humanitarian access. We strongly condemn all forms of human rights violations, abuses, violence against civilians, sex and gender-based violence in particular. Fourth, we reiterate our full support to MONUSCO, which is acting within its mandate and doing critical work in the DRC, including in the area of Goma, stress a strong commitment to the safety and security of its peacekeepers, condemns the attacks committed against personnel, and offer condolences to the families and government of the deceased peacekeepers. MONUSCO must be granted full access and freedom of movement to effectively fulfill its mandate and address urgent needs. The protection of civilians and humanitarian personnel must remain an absolute priority. Attacks against peacekeepers may constitute potential war crimes, and those attacks against MONUSCO peacekeepers form also a basis for potential sanction designations. Mr. President, we stand ready to consider any further engagement of this Council as unnecessary. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Damos la más cordial bienvenida a la representante especial adjunta de MONUSCO, la señora Vivian Van de Per. Le agradecemos por su presentación informativa y también a la participación de la ministra de Relaciones Exteriores, Son Excellence Thérèse Kayikwamba Wagner, de la República Democrática del Congo. Señor presidente, distinguidos miembros del Consejo de Seguridad, Panamá expresa su profunda preocupación por la alarmante situación que se desarrolla en la República Democrática del Congo. En los últimos días hemos sido testigos de una escalada de violencia que ha culminado con la entrada del M23 en la ciudad de Goma, con el apoyo de las Fuerzas de Defensa de Ruanda, según lo informado por el grupo de expertos. Esta ofensiva ha desencadenado una crisis humanitaria de proporciones devastadoras. Miles de civiles se han visto obligados a abandonar sus hogares, buscando refugio en condiciones precarias y enfrentando la suspensión de servicios básicos esenciales. La interrupción de estos servicios ha dejado a la población civil en una situación de vulnerabilidad extrema. La falta de acceso a agua potable, electricidad, atención médica y otros servicios esenciales agrava el sufrimiento de los desplazados y residentes locales. El Alto Comisionado de las Naciones Unidas para los Refugiados ha expresado su profunda preocupación por el agravamiento de la violencia y la crisis humanitaria en el este de la RDC, señalando que el número de desplazados internos ha aumentado en más de 400.000 en lo que va del año. La República de Panamá reitera su rechazo a cualquier forma de violencia que atente contra la seguridad e integridad física de la población civil. Hacemos un llamado urgente a todas las partes involucradas para que cesen las hostilidades de inmediato y respeten el derecho internacional humanitario. Apoyamos plenamente el llamado de las entidades de las Naciones Unidas para habilitar pausas humanitarias temporales en áreas críticas, así como para el establecimiento de corredores humanitarios seguros y efectivos. De igual manera, reiteramos nuestro firme respaldo a la invaluable labor de la MONUSCO, cuyo compromiso con la paz y la seguridad en la región es incuestionable. Reconocemos los complejos desafíos que enfrenta la misión en un entorno altamente inestable y apreciamos profundamente sus incansables esfuerzos para proteger a la población civil y fortalecer las instituciones del Estado de Derecho. Señor presidente, el domingo durante la sesión de emergencia, Panamá expresó su solidaridad y acompañamiento a los cascos azules y sus familias. Es inaceptable que hoy nuevamente nos veamos en la terrible situación de tener que expresar nuevamente nuestro más sentido pésame por la pérdida de la vida de 4 más que murieron en la línea de combate. Reconocemos los esfuerzos regionales que se llevan a cabo para enfrentar esta crisis. En particular, destacamos la iniciativa del presidente de Kenia, William Ruto, quien ha convocado para mañana una reunión de emergencia de la Comunidad de África del Este y el Consejo de Paz y Seguridad de la Unión Africana. Ambas iniciativas con el objetivo de garantizar la protección de los civiles y fomentar el diálogo sincero entre las partes en conflicto. Señores, estamos observando la escalada de este conflicto en tiempo real. Es el momento oportuno para que este Consejo actúe de manera contundente con el fin de garantizar el acceso irrestricto a la ayuda humanitaria y restablecer los servicios básicos en las áreas afectadas. La población congoleña debe recibir el apoyo de la comunidad internacional basado en los principios de las Cartas de las Naciones Unidas para evitar una crisis regional. Reafirmamos nuestro compromiso inquebrantable con la soberanía e integridad territorial de la República Democrática del Congo. Exigimos al M23 y a las Fuerzas de Defensa de Ruanda a detener de manera inmediata su avance y a proceder a su retiro completo, respetando plenamente el acuerdo del alto al fuego y los procesos de mediación en curso. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
I thank the representative of Panama for the statement. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Therese Kaikwamba Wagner, State Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation and Francophonie of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. You have the floor, Madame.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Président, distingués membres du Conseil, permettez-moi au nom du gouvernement et du peuple de la République démocratique du Congo d'exprimer mes remerciements pour la convocation de cette seconde réunion en 48 heures sur la situation sécuritaire dans mon pays. Je tiens à saluer l'engagement de la présidence algérienne du Conseil, ainsi que les efforts constants de ceux qui, malgré les vents contraires, œuvrent sans relâche pour la paix et la sécurité internationale. Avant de poursuivre, permettez-moi de saluer le sacrifice ultime consenti au cours des dernières 48 heures par les soldats de la paix de la MONUSCO et de la SAMI DRC en République démocratique du Congo. Je rends également hommage au courage et à la résilience des forces armées de la République démocratique du Congo, ainsi qu'à la mémoire des populations civiles congolaises victimes de l'assaut impitoyable du Rwanda. Nous, la République démocratique du Congo, reconnaissons également les pertes en vie humaine parmi les soldats rwandais au cours des affrontements, tandis que le Rwanda persiste obstinément à imposer son faux récit, prétendant ne pas mener une guerre en République démocratique du Congo. Cette position coûte cher aux familles des centaines de soldats rwandais tombés dans cette guerre insensée. Même si leur propre pays refuse de les reconnaître, de leur rendre hommage ou d'accorder à leurs familles le droit de pleurer leurs pertes, nous, la République démocratique du Congo, savons combien la guerre dépasse toutes les frontières. Nous reconnaissons que la folie dans laquelle Kigali nous a entraînés fait des victimes partout. En ce qui concerne le mouvement de protestation observé ce matin dans la ville de Kinshasa, j'aimerais ici rassurer nos partenaires que le gouvernement de la République démocratique du Congo a pris toutes les mesures nécessaires pour assurer la protection des missions diplomatiques accréditées en République démocratique du Congo. Ces incidents, profondément regrettables, ne reflètent en rien l'engagement constant de notre pays envers le respect du droit international et des principes qui régissent les relations diplomatiques. Aujourd'hui, si nous sommes ici encore une fois, en moins de 48 heures, nous devons impérativement avoir le courage de nous poser cette question. Quel impact concret la déclaration de ce Conseil, quel était l'impact concret de la déclaration de ce Conseil du 26 janvier? Monsieur le Président, à Goma, les forces armées de la République démocratique du Congo, soutenues par la MONUSCO et les troupes de la SADC, continuent à bravoure à combattre. Mais cette défense héroïque et déterminée ne saurait masquer l'ampleur du drame. Une fois de plus, les soldats de la paix, dont 4 soldats sud-africains de la SAMI DRC, ont payé le prix ultime de leur détermination. Ces victimes de plus ne sont autres que le résultat d'actes criminels constitutifs de crimes contre l'humanité, de crimes de guerre perpétrés par les RDF en toute liberté et sous silence de ce Conseil. Mesdames et messieurs, permettez-moi une parenthèse. Parmi les 4 valeureux casques bleus sud-africains tombés à Goma, l'un d'entre eux n'a pas succombé directement pendant le combat, mais il a succombé à ses blessures. Ce drame illustre tragiquement la réalité actuelle. Des vies se perdent dans une ville assiégée, privée d'électricité, d'eau, de voies d'évacuation. Tel est aujourd'hui le sort de millions de personnes à Goma, piégées, sans accès à l'eau, à l'électricité, à la nourriture ou à un abri sûr. C'est la tragédie partagée par les citoyens congolais, ainsi que par des milliers de soldats de la paix et d'humanitaires pris au piège. Je remémore les mots poignants de la représentante spéciale, Mme Bintou Keïta, il y a 2 jours. Nous sommes piégés. We are trapped. Les dernières 24 heures, plus de 100 blessés ont été accueillis dans les centres de santé du Comité international de la Croix-Rouge. Et la situation humanitaire continue à se dégrader, avec plus de 500 000 nouveaux déplacés dans la province du Nord et du Sud Kivu, pour le mois de janvier uniquement. Les forces de défense rwandaises et leurs supplétifs du M23 ont franchi nos frontières, occupé nos villes et nos villages, chassé nos compatriotes de leurs foyers et instauré une administration parallèle, en violation du droit international, et ce, en violation des positions claires de ce Conseil. Jusqu'à quand le Rwanda continuera-t-il d'abuser votre respect et de votre autorité? Quel instrument international doit-il encore violer pour que ce Conseil prenne enfin les mesures nécessaires contre Kigali? De la Charte des Nations Unies au droit international humanitaire, aux droits de l'homme, en passant par les processus de paix de Luanda et de Nairobi, le Rwanda a prouvé que vos déclarations ne lui importent guère. Le cessez-le-feu du 4 août 2024 n'a été pour lui qu'une chimère, et il s'est pris d'ignorer vos avertissements du 26 janvier, allant jusqu'à bombarder des hôpitaux et des maisons dans la ville de Goma. Pas plus tard que dimanche le 26 janvier, le Rwanda, pays contributeur en troupes des Nations Unies, par le truchement de son représentant, a considéré ce Conseil comme complice de sa déstabilisation, allant jusqu'à associer la MONUSCO à cette démarche invraisemblable. Si cette stratégie a porté des fruits par le passé, le temps de la manipulation et du mensonge est désormais révolu. La vie de la population civile, privée de moyens de subsistance depuis maintenant 4 jours à Goma, dépend des décisions que vous devez prendre aujourd'hui. Nous ne sommes pas venus aujourd'hui pour vous dire ce que vous ne connaissez pas, mais nous sommes venus vous demander de prendre le courage de faire ce qui est droit et ce qui est dans vos prérogatives. Les vies des civils ne peuvent pas être pendues à la machinerie politicienne qui observe sans agir. Nous exigeons des actions. Reconnaître la responsabilité du Rwanda dans les violations multiples de notre souveraineté, ainsi que dans les atrocités qu'il commet, a été insuffisant pour qu'il cesse sa poursuite du conflit. Les victimes ne sont plus seulement congolaises. Le Rwanda a frappé l'Afrique et l'Amérique latine, en tuant des militaires sud-africains, malawites et uruguayens venus protéger les civils. Il a frappé ce Conseil en tuant des casques bleus de la MONUSCO. N'est-ce pas une preuve suffisante pour vous que lors de chacune des réunions convoquées par ce Conseil, la liste des orateurs regorge de pays d'Afrique et d'ailleurs, cherchant à vous pousser à agir? Dimanche, c'était l'Afrique du Sud, le Burundi, l'Uruguay. Aujourd'hui encore, nous sommes rejoints dans un esprit de solidarité par nos frères et sœurs de l'Angola, de l'Afrique du Sud, de l'Uruguay, du Guatemala, du Zimbabwe, du Sénégal, du Burundi, tous ont répondu, car l'humanité est en jeu. Tous sont venus voir ce que vous allez faire. À quel seuil de catastrophe humanitaire et de violation flagrante de notre territoire devrez-vous enfin agir pour sanctionner les responsables du M23 et les officiers rwandais et leurs complices? Si ce Conseil ne sanctionne pas, l'histoire marquera ce temps comme l'époque de l'impuissance et de l'indifférence du Conseil de sécurité. Le droit de rachat de ce Conseil sur cette crise n'est nulle part ailleurs que dans des actions immédiates. Et déjà, nous voyons venir une manœuvre prévisible. Le Rwanda, qui a délibérément dirigé cette guerre sur le territoire d'un autre État souverain, le nôtre, commence à revendiquer que les combats atteignent son propre sol. Mais que pouvait-il espérer? Une guerre, Excellence, ne connaît pas de frontières. Elle est sale. Elle consume tout sur son passage, les forts comme les faibles. Les 72 dernières heures ne sont qu'un échantillon de la tragédie régionale qui menace. Une tragédie que le peuple congolais connaît depuis des décennies. Une tragédie nationale que ce Conseil peut encore arrêter et une tragédie régionale que ce Conseil peut prévenir par une action résolue et courageuse. Monsieur le Président, certains voudraient faire croire que l'inaction est une solution africaine. Nous sommes un pays africain sous attaque, mais cette attaque dépasse nos frontières. Elle est une attaque contre le multilatéralisme, contre les principes même des Nations Unies, contre chacun de nous. Laisser cette crise s'enliser sous prétexte qu'elle serait un problème africain, nécessitant une solution africaine, revient à trahir l'esprit de solidarité internationale qui fonde cette organisation et l'esprit de responsabilité, de sécurité collective qui justifie même votre présence comme membre de ce Conseil. Nous réitérons avec insistance nos 5 demandes urgentes. 1. Le retrait immédiat des troupes rwandaises et la cessation des hostilités. 2. La mise en place de sanctions ciblées contre la chaîne de commandement des RDF et les décideurs politiques rwandais. 3. L'imposition d'un embargo sur les ressources naturelles déclarées comme rwandaises, en particulier le coltan et l'or. 4. La révocation du Rwanda en tant que contributeur de troupes aux Nations Unies. On ne peut être à la fois agresseur et prétendre jouer un rôle dans la promotion de la paix. 5. La transparence totale sur les transferts d'armes au Rwanda. Ces transferts doivent être arrêtés immédiatement pour empêcher qu'ils continuent à alimenter la violence et l'instabilité. Monsieur le Président, nous sommes ici parce que c'est ici que le monde doit gérer ses défis. C'est ici, si ce Conseil échoue, la rue va s'en charger. Comme vous le savez très bien, la rue n'a pas d'ordre, ni de tempérament. Il y a 48 heures, devant ce Conseil de sécurité, nous avons une nouvelle fois attiré votre attention sur la déclaration de guerre du Rwanda contre mon pays. Une balle qui frappe dans le cœur ne saurait laisser le reste du corps indifférent. La République démocratique du Congo est en guerre et face à cette agression, l'inaction collective semble malheureusement embraser cette situation jusque dans sa capitale. Je réitère ainsi, encore une fois, que le gouvernement de la République démocratique du Congo condamne avec fermeté toute attaque contre les missions diplomatiques accréditées en République démocratique du Congo. Cependant, l'indifférence n'est plus une option. Ce Conseil ne devrait se permettre de rester passif, car chaque jour sans réponse concrète fait grandir le prix du silence. Le moment est venu pour ce Conseil de démontrer son courage et son engagement. L'histoire retiendra vos choix. Que cette Assemblée soit le rempart de la justice et de la dignité humaine. Je vous remercie.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Kaikwamba Wagner for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Rwanda.
Mr. President, thank you for giving me the floor. I would like to once again commend Algeria's able leadership of the Council for the month of January. I'm grateful for your invitation to participate in this important meeting and thank all the member states that spoke before me. I'd like to recognize Ms. Viviane van der Perry, Deputy SRSG. I also recognize Honorable Teresa Kaikwamba Wagner, DRC Minister for Foreign Affairs. I also would like to recognize the participation of the representatives of Angola, Uruguay, Zimbabwe, Burundi, South Africa, Guatemala, and Senegal. Less than 2 days ago, this council gathered to discuss the ongoing situation in the eastern DRC. Since then, it has rapidly evolved. On 26 January, the M23/AFC rebel group is reported to have taken over the city of Goma. This triggered retreating forces from DRC coalition to attack and shell the Rwandan territory. Rwanda condemns in the strongest terms these attacks on the town of Rubavu in the northern province, which killed 5 people, innocent Rwandan civilians, and left another 35 injured. This indiscriminate shelling is unacceptable war crime, and further proof of the necessity of maintaining Rwanda's defensive posture put in place precisely to prevent this kind of threat. I would like to recall that these attacks are not the first, but the latest of a long list of provocative actions by the government of the DRC. I'd like to also recall that Rwanda has always shown restraint and sought to engage the DRC in dealing with the root causes of insecurity in the region and along our common border. Rwanda will always stand for peace, as we have the most to lose in the continuation of this conflict. I have always emphasized that Rwanda knows the dividend of peace. We suffered insecurity. Our nation was almost a failed state. So we have worked hard to build peace and to work for peace in the region. So we are strongly committed to peace, peaceful coexistence, and a peaceful region. The coalition of anti-Rwanda forces on our border poses an existential threat to our country, which is not the case for the government of Kinshasa, which feels insulated from whatever happens 2,000 kilometers away. The border of Rwanda is 2,000 kilometers away from Kinshasa. A shell from across in DRC that falls on Rwandan territory falls on a very densely populated villages, and lives are lost. Even one bullet takes a life. Those in Kinshasa will not stay awake when such insecurity happens. So we are very serious when we talk of an existential security threat to Rwanda. Mr. President, the action of this coalition are equally devastating for Congolese. Rwanda is providing humanitarian relief to incoming refugees together with the help of international partners on the ground. A temporary refugee camp has been set up in Rubavu to provide further assistance and shelter to those who are displaced. In addition, many countries have requested our assistance in facilitating the evacuation of their nationals, including European countries of origin of the mercenaries who have been deployed in eastern DRC. Rwanda also facilitated the transit of MONUSCO and other United Nations personnel through Kigali. Additionally, the hundreds of militia members and FARDC forces we have received have been disarmed and treated with respect and dignity in accordance with international law, and those who are sick are being treated. I would like here also to express Rwanda's condolences to MONUSCO forces that died in this process. On the contrary, we have been dismayed by the reports of attacks and looting of diplomatic missions in Kinshasa, including the Rwandan embassy and several other embassies of members of this council. These thuggish acts, most of which are committed in the passive presence of DRC security forces, are in total violation of international law, especially the 1961 Vienna Convention. Rwanda therefore calls on the DRC to take its diplomatic obligations seriously and hold perpetrators accountable. I'd like to emphasize that those who followed the media, the Rwandan embassy in Kinshasa was among those that was totally burnt down. Mr. President, the deteriorating security situation in the eastern DRC has only one immediate cause: the obsession by the president of the DRC for a military solution and thirst for regime change in Rwanda. We have said over and over to this Council. Indeed, this situation could have been solved a long time ago if President Tshisekedi had demonstrated political will and good faith in finding a lasting solution to this conflict. I would like to recall that President Tshisekedi took the unilateral decision to expel the M23 from the political dialogue under the Nairobi process, as well as East African Community Regional Force, which was deployed by EAC. Yet the EAC Regional Force had led to a ceasefire that held for 6 months, which led the M23 to relinquish 80% of the territory it was holding. This was from March 2023 to September 2023. To fill in this vacuum, the DRC instead decided to replace it with a SADC-led force with a more offensive mandate. These two unilateral decisions by President Tshisekedi have caused the Nairobi process to stall, despite numerous attempts to revive it. Mr. President, Council members, as if frustrating the Nairobi process was not enough, the DRC President repeatedly made inflammatory statements against Rwanda. For instance, in December 2022, in a statement addressed to Rwandan youth, he promised to help them, and I quote his exact words, "Get rid of this diabolic regime in Kigali." Those are the President's words. Moreover, in December 2023, during the last campaign, he doubled down saying that he would bomb Kigali without even setting boots on the ground. These are the exact words of the President of DRC against Rwanda, promising to cause regime change. This echoes a similar statement made on 17th November 2024 in Katanga, when he told military and provisional leadership that if he is given the opportunity to revise the constitution, he would use this new term to overthrow the government in Kigali. Those are clear and constant threats that Rwanda will never take lightly. To implement these threats, President Tshisekedi has mobilized a large coalition which includes the FDLR, genocidal militia, European mercenaries, Wazalendo militias, Burundian armed forces, and some DRC. Council members, consequently, Rwanda calls on all foreign forces deployed in the DRC to withdraw from this coalition only aimed at harming Rwanda. I wish to stress that the international community, including some members sitting in this council, have their fair share of the blame in what is happening today in the DRC, at least to condemn even threats of regime change from one member state to another. You also chose to turn a blind eye on these inflammatory statements and the build-up of the aforementioned military coalition, never once condemning the regime change agenda behind them. Mr. President, Council members, Rwanda remains committed to the Rwanda process, given important milestones that were achieved in the process that was led by President Lorenzo and Angola. And one of the milestones, the adoption of a concept of operations, the CONOPS, of the harmonized plan for the neutralization of the FDLR and lifting Rwanda's defensive forces, and a ceasefire that was agreed and was holding from August 2024. The remaining security issues between Rwanda and the DRC was the AFC M23 question. This question was therefore to be addressed. Unfortunately, in the ministerial meeting of 14th December, the DRC categorically refused any commitment of dialogue with the AFC M23. This then prevented a consensus on a draft peace agreement to be signed the following day by heads of state. Therefore, the only solution was to postpone the summit, as Rwanda is not interested in just a photo op. The heads of state were going to Angola for only one agenda item, to sign an agreement that should have been agreed. Mr. President, Rwanda deploys the intensification of hostilities between the Congolese coalition and the AFC/M23 since the breakdown of the summit. More worrying is the intensive shelling by FDLR, FARDC, from densely populated areas, including IDP camps, towards other populated areas held by AFC and M23. In order to bring about peace in Eastern DRC, Rwanda calls on the following. 1, the full implementation of mainly the neutralization of FDLR, which will lead to the lifting of Rwanda's defensive measures. 2, beyond the CONOPS, Rwanda calls on the withdrawal of foreign troops, part of the Congolese coalition, and we call for European mercenaries to be repatriated and be held accountable. 3, Rwanda believes that MONUSCO can be useful in restoring peace in Eastern DRC by stopping its support to a national army with a regime change mandate, as well as its support to a UN-sanctioned genocidal force and European mercenaries. Rwanda also reiterates its position that it has no hostile intentions against MONUSCO, despite its total failure over the past 26 years. 4, Rwanda believes in the strict adherence to the ceasefire of August 4th, 2024 by all parties, which would allow for a favorable environment for direct dialogue between the DRC and the M23. In this regard, I want to inform you that His Excellency President Kagame spoke with his counterparts from South Africa, His Excellency President Ramaphosa, yesterday. This positive conversation, held in a cordial atmosphere, was productive as it supported the already agreed ceasefire and the resumption of political talks, including with the AFC and M23. I also wish to inform you that tomorrow there will be a virtual ESC summit convened by His Excellency President Ruto on this very question. Before I close, I would like to mention that the DRC government has just claimed that there are Rwandan forces that died in DRC. I want to say that this is categorically not correct. If it was correct, DRC would have provided evidence. I don't think they have that evidence. If they have evidence of any Rwandan soldiers who have died on DRC soil, they should produce that evidence, which I'm sure, I know 100% sure, is not available because that's not true. In closing, Rwanda is committed to the pursuit of a political solution to the conflict. However, we believe that the Rwanda process must not be personalized or taken as an end in itself, but as a tool to resolve security concerns between Rwanda and the DRC. Both the Rwanda and Nairobi process urgently require new impetus in order to achieve sustainable peace and stability for all the countries in our region. We hope that the recent engagements will work towards that goal. I thank you, Council members.
I thank the representative of Rwanda for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Angola.
His Excellency Ambassador Amar Benjama, President of United Nations Security Council for the month of January, distinguished members of the Security Council, we welcome the presence of Her Excellency Teresa Kayakwamba Wagner, State Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation and Francophonie of the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, and Ambassador Ernesto Remusillo, Permanent Representative of the Republic of Rwanda to the United Nations. We thank Mrs. Viviane Van Perre, Deputy Special Representative of the Secretary General for Protection and Operations, for her briefing on the latest developments on the ground and for her bravery in keeping high the UN flag under these difficult circumstances. We deplore today's attacks against diplomatic missions in Kinshasa and call on DRC authorities to ensure their protection under the 1961 Vienna Convention on the Diplomatic Relations. Mr. President, we are at a very critical juncture in the pursuit of lasting peace in the DRC and the normalization of diplomatic relations between the DRC and Rwanda. The M23 has made a significant military advance in North Kivu province, worsening the already fragile security and humanitarian situation in the eastern DRC. It resulted in the capture of the provincial capital, Goma, despite calls by the United Nations Security Council, the African Union, and the other actors in the international community to halt this military advance. This is a make-or-break moment that requires wisdom and pragmatism from the concerned parties
and all relevant stakeholders, including the United Nations, the African Union, and sub-regional organizations. Although His Excellency João Manuel Gonçalves Lourenço, President of the Republic of Angola, African Union champion for peace and reconciliation, facilitator of the normalization of diplomatic relations between DRC and Rwanda, is making every effort to advance the Luanda process, the security and humanitarian situation in the eastern DRC has suffered a substantial deterioration in the last few weeks. On 24th January 2025, the Angolan head of state expressed deep concern over the serious deterioration of the peace and security situation in the eastern DRC. He condemned and denounced the actions of M23 and its supporters, which undermine the progress made under the Luanda process. He reaffirmed that there is no military solution to the conflict and urged the parties to return immediately to the negotiating table. Due to the rapid deterioration of the situation, members of the enhanced ad hoc verification mechanism and the expanded joint verification mechanism deployed in the city of Goma under the Luanda process to support the pacification process in the eastern DRC on Sunday had to be evacuated to Angola. Mr. President, the UN Security Council is the world's last resort when it comes to maintaining international peace and security. Its mandate is clear and must be respected and upheld. Today, we have one simple and direct message to this Council. The conflict in DRC must cease and the warring parties must return to the negotiating table. The ongoing hostilities in the eastern DRC have already claimed the lives of thousands of civilians and injured many others. Credible reports indicated that Goma has neither running water nor electricity, thus making living conditions of the population and those living in the IDP camps almost unbearable. In addition, millions of people have fled their homes and they don't know where to go. We demand the immediate and unconditional cessation of hostilities, the withdrawal of M23 from the occupied area, as well as the end of its establishment of parallel administration in DRC territory. We call for the full respect of integrity of DRC in accordance with the UN Charter, the international law, and the principles of sovereign equality of all member states. We call on all parties in conflict to fully respect international humanitarian and human rights law, the protection of civilians, IDP camps and medical sites, and the protection of peacekeepers, while noting that attacks on civilians and peacekeepers constitute war crimes. Direct attacks to MONUSCO and some DRC personnel are unacceptable, and those responsible must be held accountable. We urge the signatories of the August 2024 ceasefire agreement to urgently resume dialogue without preconditions. In this context, we call on both parties to return to the Luanda process under the facilitation of His Excellency João Manuel Gonçalves Lourenço, President of the Republic of Angola. Mr. President, the hardly won gains achieved through the Luanda process following months of intense negotiation must be preserved. In his capacity as the African Union champion for peace and reconciliation, mandated to facilitate the mediation between Rwanda and DRC, His Excellency João Manuel Gonçalves Lourenço undertook several initiatives to resolve the difference between the two countries and made substantial progress, including the signing of the DRC-Rwanda ceasefire agreement on the 30th July 2024, which entered into force on 4th August 2024. On 15 December 2024, he convened a summit of the presidents of the two countries, which was subsequently postponed due to disagreement regarding how to address the M23 issue. We reiterate our call for a speedy and unconditional de-escalation of hostilities and genuine and renewed commitment to peace by both sides. Immediate return to the negotiating table is the only way out, since the conflict and security challenges in the eastern DRC have no military solution. The parties must continue exploring ways to settle the M23 pending issue to create conditions to reschedule the tripartite summit. We encourage the resumption of contacts between His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, former President of the Republic of Kenya, and the facilitator mandate by the East African Community, with the armed groups in DRC, including the M23, under the Nairobi process to address sources of grievances that have led to the current level of insecurity in DRC. The United Nations, the African Union, sub-regional organizations, and leaders in the region must work together in a complementary approach to bring DRC and Rwanda back to the Luanda process. To conclude, Mr. President, we continue encouraging all parties to avoid any actions or rhetoric that can further escalate tensions, including provocative language and inflammatory public statements, which are counterproductive to the diplomatic efforts to achieve a lasting solution to this conflict that has prevailed for so long. In his quest to advance the Luanda process, in the last few days, His Excellency João Manuel Gonçalves Lourenço, the President of the Republic of Angola, has been in contact with several African leaders. Today, he spoke with His Excellency Mohamed Ould Ghazouani, President of the Republic of Mauritania and current President of the African Union, and His Excellency Teodoro Obiang Nguema Basogo, President of the Republic of Equatorial Guinea and current President of the Economic Community of Central Africa States, to which DRC and Rwanda are members. Angola reiterates the steadfast commitment of His Excellency João Manuel Gonçalves Lourenço to continue playing his role as the facilitator mandated by the African Union to assist the normalization of diplomatic relations between DRC and Rwanda to achieve peace and security in the eastern DRC. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Angola for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Uruguay.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Agradecemos la información proporcionada por la señora Viviane van der Perre, representante especial adjunta para la protección y operaciones en la misión de estabilización de las Naciones Unidas en la República Democrática del Congo, MONUSCO, así como la convocatoria de esta reunión informativa por parte de la Presidencia. Destacamos el rol del Consejo de Seguridad en este tema, que ha impulsado un alto al fuego en línea con el comunicado emitido por sus miembros en la noche del domingo 26 de enero, con cuyo contenido coincidimos totalmente. Agradecemos en ese sentido a los miembros del Consejo por su receptividad y rapidez para atender el tema, pero lamentablemente la situación en el terreno continúa siendo crítica. No obstante haberse anunciado precisamente un cese al fuego, los combates continúan y por lo que debemos continuar todos nosotros, y en especial el Consejo, dándole la máxima prioridad al cese de hostilidades. Solo esto permitiría volver a las negociaciones para arribar a una solución política duradera en el marco de los procesos de paz de Luanda y Nairobi. Con relación a la ofensiva del M23, se ha generado una situación extremadamente crítica para las poblaciones de la zona, al tiempo que se ha puesto en riesgo la seguridad de los contingentes que integran la MONUSCO. En ese sentido, se valora lo expresado por el secretario general, quien ha señalado que estos ataques pueden constituir crímenes de guerra que deben ser investigados y cuyos responsables deben rendir cuentas. Ante esta situación, pedimos su condena y que el Consejo de Seguridad tome la condena de estas acciones y que el Consejo de Seguridad tome todas las medidas necesarias para lograr que la ofensiva del M23 y aquellos que la apoyan se detengan y se consolide el cese de las hostilidades con pleno respeto a la integridad de las fuerzas de paz. En cuanto al desarrollo de la crisis en el terreno, reconocemos positivamente las orientaciones que el Comando de la MONUSCO ha definido para impulsar la seguridad de las poblaciones civiles y de los contingentes de las fuerzas de paz ante esta ofensiva. Sin perjuicio de ello, expresamos la necesidad de directivas claras para los procedimientos a seguir, así como el máximo apoyo a los contingentes nacionales en materia logística y de suministros para que puedan hacer frente a las crisis humanitarias que afectan a la población local y las consecuencias de la entrega de armas por las tropas congoleñas, así como su atención médica. Uruguay reitera su compromiso una vez más con la paz en la República Democrática del Congo y su apoyo a la MONUSCO en estos momentos críticos. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
I thank the representative of Uruguay. I now give the floor to the representative of Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of the Southern African Development Community, SADC, allow me to express our gratitude to you for convening this urgent meeting to address the escalating situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo. That we meet again on this issue following the session on Sunday, the 26th of January, underscores the gravity of the unfolding crisis. We welcome the briefing by Deputy Special Representative Vivian van der Peer, and we also recognize the presence of the Foreign Minister of the DRC, Her Excellency Therese Wagner. Mr. President, Zimbabwe, as does SADC, remains unwavering in its adherence to the principles enshrined in the United Nations Charter, particularly the peaceful settlement of disputes and the commitment to respecting the territorial integrity and political independence of states. These principles are more critical than ever as we confront the deepening crisis in the Eastern DRC, particularly in Goma. Mr. President, the chairman of SADC, His Excellency President Emerson Mnangagwa, issued a statement yesterday in which he conveyed his profound concern over the deteriorating security and humanitarian conditions in the Eastern DRC, brought about by offensive operations of the M23 rebel group and its allies. He condemns unequivocally the cowardly attacks on the UN and SADC peacekeepers, some of whom have paid the ultimate price in the pursuit of peace. On behalf of SADC, President Mnangagwa extended heartfelt condolences to the families of the fallen peacekeepers and wished them, those injured, a speedy and full recovery. Mr. President, the persistent instability in the Eastern DRC, exacerbated by the actions of the M23 rebel group, represents a grave threat to peace and security in the region. The occupation of Goma and other areas by armed groups undermines the sovereignty of the DRC and the stability of the Great Lakes region as a whole. We commend all efforts deployed at the local, regional, and international levels in addressing this crisis. However, we stress that sustainable peace can only be achieved through dialogue, strengthened governance, and robust international support. To this end, we urge the United Nations and the Security Council to, 1, provide enhanced support for the protection of civilians and the stabilization of conflict-affected areas. 2, ensure accountability for violations of international humanitarian law and human rights, including the attacks on peacekeepers and civilians. 3, address the root causes of the conflict, including the illicit exploitation of natural resources, which continues to fuel instability. 4, facilitate the movement of humanitarian assistance. Mr. President, as SADC chair, Zimbabwe reaffirms its commitment to collaborating with the African Union, the United Nations, and all stakeholders to achieve lasting peace in the DRC. The current crisis highlights the urgent need to reform the international peace and security architecture, including the United Nations Security Council, to better respond to the unique challenges facing Africa. Moreover, we reiterate the importance of eliminating the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons, which perpetuates instability across the continent. Mr. President, in conclusion, SADC stands in full solidarity with the people and government of the Democratic Republic of Congo. We call on all stakeholders to act decisively to prevent further escalation, safeguard lives, and restore peace and stability. This is a moment for collective action, a moment to demonstrate our shared commitment to unity, peace, and sustainable development. Zimbabwe and SADC stand ready to contribute meaningfully to these efforts, and we look forward to working with our partners to forge a peaceful and prosperous future for the DRC, the SADC region, and beyond. To that end, the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe and current chairperson of SADC has called for an extraordinary summit scheduled for the 30th of January 2025 to discuss this matter. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Zimbabwe for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Burundi.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Président, ma délégation se réjouit de participer une nouvelle fois à ce briefing sur la détérioration de la situation sécuritaire en République démocratique du Congo, marquée par les récents développements dans la ville de Goma. Elle félicite la présidence algérienne du Conseil pour avoir convoqué cette réunion dans un délai aussi court. Je salue la présence de son Excellence Madame la ministre des Affaires étrangères de la RDC, son Excellence Thérèse Kaikwamba-Wagner, et me réjouis du briefing fait par Madame Viviane Van de Peer, représentante spéciale adjointe chargée de la protection des opérations à la MONUSCO. Avant d'entamer mon propos, le gouvernement du Burundi présente ses condoléances aux soldats qui ont perdu leur vie durant les récents affrontements durant les 48 dernières heures. Monsieur le Président, pour la deuxième fois, en l'espace de 48 heures, nous sommes réunis pour constater avec une grande amertume que la situation à l'est de la RDC s'est gravement dégradée. Le moment est venu pour que les paroles cèdent la place à des actes concrets. Comme nous l'avons affirmé il y a 2 jours, le Burundi soutient fermement le respect de la coexistence pacifique entre les nations et rejette catégoriquement les guerres par procuration. Monsieur le Président, depuis près de 3 décennies, l'Est de la RDC est devenu le théâtre de massacres insoutenables, de conflits armés d'une rare violence alimentés par des intérêts étrangers exacerbant les tensions locales et sapant les efforts de paix. Chaque jour, des violations graves des droits humains sont observées et les victimes se comptent désormais en millions. Les récents développements à Goma témoignent d'un potentiel embrasement régional. Si aucune action concrète n'est prise aujourd'hui pour condamner les responsables et bloquer leurs actions, nous risquons de devenir les témoins d'une catastrophe et l'histoire nous tiendra directement responsables. À ce jour, le Burundi se félicite des accords bilatéraux avec la RDC en matière de coopération militaire pour la sécurité des frontières communes. Et si je puis me permettre de placer une petite parenthèse, le Burundi ne fait pas partie d'une quelconque coalition. Monsieur le Président, depuis des années, les Nations Unies, à travers le travail inestimable du groupe d'experts de la RDC, ont documenté avec précision les dynamiques de ce conflit. Des rapports multiples ont été présentés dans cette salle, soulignant l'implication d'acteurs extérieurs connus pour soutenir les groupes armés locaux, les violations flagrantes des droits de l'homme et le pillage systématique des ressources naturelles de la RDC. Combien de rapports supplémentaires faut-il avant que la communauté internationale et en particulier le Conseil de sécurité prenne ses responsabilités? Il y a 48 heures, au cours de notre intervention, nous nous sommes interrogés sur le silence assourdissant du Conseil de sécurité alors que des milliers de vies sont tragiquement perdues chaque jour. Où est la communauté internationale? Où est le Conseil de sécurité qui se montre si actif
dans d'autres conflits. Devons-nous interpréter ce silence comme une sensibilité sélective? Comme l'a dit une fois Martin Luther King Jr., à la fin, nous nous souviendrons non pas des mots de nos ennemis, mais des silences de nos amis. Ne soyons pas les amis silencieux. Soyons du côté de la Charte des Nations Unies pour sauver l'ordre institué à San Francisco en juin 1945. Monsieur le Président, ce conflit dure depuis des décennies et pourtant aucune résolution n'a condamné le Rwanda, auteur de violations flagrantes des principes de la souveraineté nationale et de l'intégrité territoriale de la RDC. Le Rwanda ne nie même pas sa présence sur le terrain ni son soutien au M23, comme l'ont souligné plus des 3/4 des membres du Conseil lors de la dernière réunion. L'intégrité du territoire de la RDC ne peut être compromise et les incursions armées, les ingérences étrangères, le pillage systématique de ses ressources naturelles et les violations répétées de ses frontières doivent cesser immédiatement. Au regard de la situation sécuritaire humanitaire, le Burundi s'inscrit toujours du côté du plein respect du droit international et du droit international humanitaire. À cet effet, le Burundi condamne les violations flagrantes du droit international et du droit international humanitaire, appelle à une cessation immédiate des hostilités à l'est de la RDC, à garantir que ce territoire ne devienne plus un terrain de confrontation indirecte entre acteurs régionaux et internationaux, soutient les efforts des processus de Luanda et de Nairobi en exigeant le respect des engagements pris par toutes les parties, exige le retrait des forces rwandaises de la RDC et réitère son attachement au respect de la souveraineté de la République démocratique du Congo, son intégrité territoriale, son indépendance politique et son droit à se défendre contre toute agression extérieure. Recommande de poursuivre les soutiens aux populations civiles et déplacées de guerre afin de subvenir à leurs besoins de base avec une attention particulière aux femmes et aux enfants. Pour conclure, et comme nous l'avons déjà exprimé, le Conseil de sécurité devrait être attentif aux revendications légitimes du peuple et du gouvernement congolais. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of Burundi for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of South Africa.
Mr. President, thank you for convening a second meeting within just a few days of the current tenuous situation in the Eastern DRC. The situation on the ground remains dangerously fluid as M23 continues its offensive campaign in North and South Kivu. We thank the Deputy Special Representative, Ms. Vivian van der Peer, for her briefing. And again, we wish to recognize the presence of Minister Therese Kayikwamba-Wagner in the chamber. Since the last meeting of the Council on the situation in the Eastern DRC, 4 additional South African peacekeepers lost their lives in the continuing conflict in Goma. On 27th January 2025, M23 launched several mortar bombs aimed at Goma Airport, which landed in the base of the South African troops, killing 3 soldiers and injuring some troops. A 4th soldier, as Minister said earlier, succumbed to his injuries sustained during the weekend attacks. This illustrates that the M23 is well-resourced and would have acquired such resources through means that are against the sanctions imposed by this Council. It is a contradiction in terms that a major UN peacekeeping troop contributing country could provide resources to an illegal armed group that is conducting offensives against peacekeepers, civilians, and key infrastructure thereby undermining the mandate of this Council. That must be addressed with utmost urgency. As we stated at the last meeting of the Council a few days ago, the future of UN peacekeeping and its credibility is at stake if we are to tolerate such violations without any ramifications. The Security Council must speak with one voice and act in unison to stop the carnage unfolding in the Eastern DRC. Unfortunately, a press statement of the Security Council, while sending an important political message, has proven to be insufficient in the current situation. Consequently, South Africa would like to highlight the following issues. Firstly, the UN needs to, as a matter of urgency, provide additional support to MONUSCO in order to reinforce operational positions. This is to ensure that MONUSCO can fulfill its primary mandate to protect civilians. This support will also assist to ensure that no further peacekeepers' lives are lost. Similarly, a stronger consideration must be made to bolster the support that MONUSCO provides to the South African Development Community Mission in the DRC, SAMI DRC. Both missions, have the primary responsibility of protecting civilians and key civilian infrastructure. They are instrumental as long as armed groups remain active in the Eastern DRC. Secondly, we remain concerned about the worsening humanitarian situation with millions of people in need of humanitarian assistance. There is a need to ensure that appropriate conditions are created for humanitarian aid to reach people in need across Eastern DRC. All parties to the conflict must uphold international humanitarian law and human rights law. Thirdly, we reiterate our call for the resumption of negotiations under the Luanda process. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa held a telephone call with President Kagame of Rwanda yesterday to discuss recent developments in the Eastern DRC and the escalation in fighting that has resulted in the deaths of many peacekeepers, including South Africans. The two heads of states agreed on the urgent need for a ceasefire and the resumption of the talks by all parties to the conflict. Accordingly, South Africa recognizes the significant strides made by President João Manuel Gonçalves Lourenço of Angola in facilitating peaceful resolution of the tensions between the DRC and Rwanda. We urge parties to recommit to these talks and address all outstanding issues amicably to allow the region to return to peace and the restoration of the political rapprochement and good neighborliness. This includes both sides addressing their relations with illegal armed groups and the withdrawal of the Rwanda Defense Forces from the DRC. We thus look forward to the much-anticipated East African Community Extraordinary Summit likely to take place in the coming days, with the participation of both President Tshisekedi and President Kagame. Lastly, the Council needs to underline the importance of preventative measures to avoid the recurrence of the cyclical conflict in the Eastern DRC. It is well known that the genesis of this conflict is primarily the illegal exploitation of the Congolese natural resources. International and regional efforts, including those initiated by the International Conference on the Great Lakes region, to address the problem of the resource scarce in the region must be operationalized and supported. As I conclude, Mr. President, I wish to remind Council members that South Africa has suffered many casualties in this conflict. The reason we never hesitate in supporting peace efforts, even at excessive cost, is because we are a product of international solidarity at whose center was the United Nations. Therefore, the ultimate sacrifice of South African peacekeepers in the promoting peace and security in the Great Lakes region should not be in vain. Our plea is for this Council to always protect those who value, safeguard, and execute the mandates adopted in this chamber, and also hold into account those who violate the decisions of this very Council. Failure to do so can only undermine the credibility of and delegitimize the authority of this Council and the United Nations as a whole. We trust that all members of this Council and the international community can support measures towards establishing a ceasefire, encouraging dialogue, and promoting efforts towards peace and stability in the whole country and the Eastern DRC in particular. Thank you.
I thank the representative of South Africa for this statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Guatemala.
Señor presidente del Consejo de Seguridad, miembros de este Consejo, señora ministra de Relaciones Exteriores, Cooperación Internacional y Francofonía de la República Democrática del Congo, Thérèse Kayikwamba Wagner. Dada la urgencia de la situación en la República Democrática del Congo y su desarrollo, agradecemos la convocatoria de la reunión urgente del pasado 26 de enero y nuevamente el día de hoy. Agradecemos también la información recibida de la señora Viviane Van de Per, representante especial adjunta para protección y operaciones de la MONUSCO, así como los esfuerzos por mantener informados oportunamente a los países contribuyentes de tropas. Señor presidente, el Gobierno de Guatemala desea manifestar su gran preocupación por el agravamiento de las hostilidades en el este de la República Democrática del Congo. Condenamos en los términos más enérgicos la ofensiva lanzada por el Movimiento 23 de marzo de las últimas semanas, su expansión a Kivu del Norte y la toma de la ciudad de Goma. Esta situación tiene un efecto devastador para la población civil, que al momento ha generado el desplazamiento de cerca de 3 millones de personas solo en Kivu del Norte. Como país contribuyente de tropas, Guatemala reitera su apoyo inquebrantable a los esfuerzos de paz en curso, a los procesos de Luanda y Nairobi, dirigidos a reducir las tensiones en la República Democrática del Congo. Lamentamos el fallecimiento de cascos azules de diferentes nacionalidades, incluyendo de Uruguay, Sudáfrica y Malawi, y esperamos la pronta recuperación de los heridos, incluyendo 2 oficiales guatemaltecos. Reafirmamos nuestro apoyo al mandato de la MONUSCO de proteger a los civiles y condenamos enérgicamente las acciones de los grupos armados que pongan en peligro la seguridad de los cascos azules de las Naciones Unidas y el personal civil. Su protección y seguridad inmediata debe ser garantizada, así como la provisión de los suministros necesarios para el desempeño de su misión. Guatemala expresa que los ataques contra cascos azules de Naciones Unidas pueden constituir crímenes de guerra conforme al derecho internacional, en particular teniendo en cuenta que la misión prioritaria cumplida por el contingente nacional es la protección de civiles ante peligro inminente de violencia física, la cual es cumplida de manera efectiva e imparcial. Esperamos que el Consejo de Seguridad tome de manera unívoca y con carácter urgente medidas contundentes condenando los ataques contra los cascos azules que cada vez están más en riesgo. Señor Presidente, exhortamos a todos los actores a que respeten la soberanía y la integridad territorial de la República Democrática del Congo y pongan fin a todas las formas de apoyo a los grupos armados, ya sean congoleños o extranjeros. Muchas gracias.
I thank the representative of Guatemala for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Senegal.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Président, le Sénégal voudrait remercier l'Algérie pour la tenue de cette importante réunion et saluer l'exposé de Mme Viviane Van de Peer. Ma délégation se félicite également de la présence de Son Excellence Mme Thérèse Kikwamba Wagner, ministre des Affaires étrangères de la République démocratique du Congo. À l'entame de son intervention, ma délégation s'incline devant la mémoire de tous les casques bleus et soldats tombés au champ d'honneur. Ainsi, le Sénégal présente ses plus sincères condoléances à l'Afrique du Sud, au Malawi et à l'Uruguay en particulier. Nous exprimons notre solidarité agissante à la République démocratique du Congo et à l'endroit de tout le personnel onusien sur place qui continue d'apporter assistance et réconfort aux personnes dans le besoin, et ce, à bien des égards, au péril de leur vie. Aussi, ma délégation a une pensée émue pour les victimes civiles de part et d'autre et souhaite un prompt rétablissement aux blessés, dont 4 éléments sénégalais de la mission. Mon pays réitère son attachement à la reddition des comptes pour tous les crimes commis à l'égard du personnel des Nations Unies, comme recommandé par la résolution 2589-2021. Monsieur le Président, comme vous pouvez l'imaginer, le Sénégal, avec 459 éléments à la MONUSCO, est gravement préoccupé par la situation des casques bleus sur place. En effet, c'est au Congo en 1960, soit 4 mois seulement après son indépendance, que le Sénégal s'était engagé dans l'ONU. C'est dire que mon pays est resté activement engagé dans les efforts onusiens pour apporter la paix dans cette région qui n'a connu depuis lors que des paix intermittentes. En ces moments graves, nous rappelons à toutes les parties étatiques et non étatiques les obligations qui pèsent sur elles pour la protection des civils, en particulier les femmes et les enfants, celles des soldats de la paix et le personnel humanitaire, ainsi que le nécessaire respect en toutes circonstances des droits humains. À l'instar de tous ces préoccupants, le Sénégal condamne avec la plus grande fermeté la reprise des combats dans le Nord Kivu, en particulier à Goma, en violation flagrante de l'accord de cessez-le-feu conclu le 30 juillet 2024. L'intensification des affrontements constitue une atteinte grave à la sécurité de la région et du continent. Nous ne pouvons laisser cette situation dégénérer en une crise globale qui impactera des centaines de milliers de vies civiles et dans une région déjà plus qu'éprouvée. C'est pourquoi ma délégation s'associe à l'appel du A3+, du Conseil de sécurité, ainsi qu'à celui du secrétaire général, exigeant l'arrêt immédiat de l'offensive du M23 et de son expansion territoriale. La seule solution qui vaille dans ce conflit est d'ordre politique. Le Sénégal invite donc les parties à honorer leurs engagements dans le cadre du cessez-le-feu, à donner une chance aux pourparlers diplomatiques sous l'égide des pairs africains et à œuvrer de bonne foi pour la paix et la stabilité régionale. Raison pour laquelle mon pays réaffirme son soutien indéfectible aux efforts continentaux de médiation entre la RDC et le Rwanda, actuellement déployés dans le cadre du processus de Luanda, dirigé par le président de l'Angola. Il plaide également pour la poursuite des consultations dans le cadre du processus de Nairobi pour régler la question persistante des groupes armés, y compris le M23, et tracer la voie à suivre pour instaurer la paix et la stabilité dans la région. Monsieur le Président, ma délégation ne saurait conclure sans demander au Conseil de tirer les enseignements pertinents de ce conflit sur la MONUSCO. Les exposés présentés renseignent à suffisance sur les difficultés rencontrées et la résilience du personnel à accomplir sa mission. Il importe alors au Conseil de lui fournir les moyens nécessaires pour mener à bien sa tâche, à savoir contribuer à la protection des populations civiles dans la zone où elle est déployée et appuyer la stabilisation et le renforcement des institutions de la RDC, ainsi que les principales réformes de la gouvernance et de la sécurité. Cela passera nécessairement par la garantie d'un environnement propice à son déploiement, l'implication de toutes les parties prenantes et une meilleure coordination avec les forces régionales présentes en RDC dans la prise en charge de la menace posée par les groupes armés. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of Senegal for the statement. Her Excellency Ms. Thérèse Kaikwamba Wagner, State Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation and Francophonie of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give her the floor.
Mr. President, thank you for the floor. Members of the Council, first of all, I would like to note that for the first time in our meetings, Rwanda did extend condolences for the fallen peacekeepers. However, I would like to rectify something. The peacekeepers did not die in a process. The peacekeepers were killed. Second of all, SADC forces deployment through SAMI DRC were not deployed unilaterally by the DRC, but rather with a mandate from the AU, an organization Rwanda is a part of, even if its behavior in the DRC clearly flaunts its principles. Third, the M23 excluded itself from the Nairobi process by renewing attacks against the FARDC. The government of the DRC has nonetheless expressed its willingness to re-include the M23 in the Nairobi process. We reject Rwanda's obsession and attempts to elevate the M23 to the level of an interlocutor deemed fit to sit at the same table as a legitimate government. 30 years down the line, we have never stooped to the level of expecting and demanding from Rwanda to talk to its brothers and sisters, the FDLR, who are still in our country. We have not stooped to that level. Fourth, on regime change, we will remind the Rwandan delegation that the M23 and the AFC has repeatedly expressed its intent to march in Kinshasa. The very M23 Rwanda forces are backing right now. There is a subtlety that should not go amiss between words and actions. Rwanda's actions, side by side with the M23, are actions seeking to overthrow a legitimately established government. On the Luanda and Nairobi processes, we will remind the Rwandan representative that the DRC never left the negotiating table. It was Rwanda that did not show up on the 15th. It was Rwanda that did not come when President Lorenzo invited us. And President Kenyatta was also present. President Tshisekedi honored his commitment. In the past weeks, we have seen efforts, calls from this council, from our partners, from our friends, urging us all to renew our efforts within the Luanda process. The DRC never left the table. It is up to Rwanda to come back to the table. I would also like to remind the Council that in this very session, the government of the DRC, through my own statement, condemned all attacks against diplomatic missions in the DRC. We do this in our concern to abide by and respect international law. However, we have yet to hear Rwanda explain to us what its efforts have been to abide by international law and to respond to the violations it has been found guilty of in the DRC. Violations of the Charter, violations of international humanitarian law, violations of international human rights law. Members of the Council, I would like to close with what has brought us back here in less than 48 hours. Rwanda's outright contempt for this Council and its declaration that it will not, for the Council and the Council's declaration, and its demonstration that it is in the deluded belief that there is a Rwandan exception when it comes to international law. But what has also brought us here is the Council's choice 2 days ago to opt for words and not for actions. This Council is not unable to take actions. In fact, it is uniquely equipped to take actions. Hence, the question that remains at the end of this meeting is whether this Council is unwilling to act. Thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Kayikwamba Wagner for her statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.